What would you do if your child was placed in handcuffs for crying at school? Well, this was a reality for a 7-year-old black boy in Missouri, and it isn't rare for black and brown kids across the country.
Now, not that I would suspect the root of sugarcoating the facts or anything, but there is a difference between merely crying and being out of control in his classroom and continuing to cry and yell in the hallway against the officer's requests. But hey, who needs context when you have a narrative to sell, right?
Right?
Whether it's getting arrested for talking back or doodling on a desk, in-school policing is harming students by taking them out of school and helping funnel them into prisons. It's called the school-to-prison pipeline.
Ooh, the school-to-prison pipeline. I did a video on a talk that mentioned that before, a while back. A link to that one is below. But back to the name of this process, you know that North Korea is called the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So what you name something and the truth of that name always aligns, doesn't it? Therefore, because you say there is a school-to-prison pipeline, there must be one.
We're talking about a structure of codes and punishments that criminalizes kids as early as preschool and increases their chances of ending up in the criminal justice system.
Criminalizes kids. So the student who was crying, because he was put into handcuffs, whether that was justified or not, if he ends up committing more serious crimes in the future, it's not his fault, but it's his elementary school's fault. That's an interesting notion. By the way, where are the parents in this equation?
99% of New York City school children who were handcuffed in 2016 were Black or Latinx.
99%, huh? Well, that's weird, because I went to the raw reports of school safety incidents in New York City for the year 2016. For each of the 4 quarters of that year, I added up all of the instances where restraints were used, metal handcuffs or otherwise, just to be fair, and then I sorted those numbers by race. Do you know what I found? Well, in none of the 4 quarters did the percentage in question get higher than the mid-70s. And so, do you know what the average percentile of New York cases requiring restraints in 2016 that then involved Black or Hispanic students? It was 57%, not 99%. Man, that is a big difference from the Roots' claim. Now, where did they get that info? Well, in tiny, tiny print, they say the ACLU. And how did the ACLU reach that number of 99%? Oh, well, they focused on only one subcategory of incidents that had a percentile of 99%, while ignoring all other such situations involving restraints. So, yes, if you cherry-pick data, you can say, aha, racism, whenever and wherever you want. And the Root is more than happy to claim the situation is even worse than it really is.
This happens when school resource officers are called into classrooms to discipline students, sometimes for something as small as violating a dress code or grabbing candy from a teacher's desk.
It's true. Zero-tolerance policies in many schools are indeed draconian. I don't necessarily agree with them or how they can be enforced. But again, are you saying that committing crimes as an adult is the fault of school police contact, justified or otherwise?
If the offense doesn't lead to an arrest, Black and brown students are still subject to harsher punishments than white students.
Oh, is your source the ACLU again? Well, you'll pardon me if I have trouble believing you or them on that claim.
Black students are 4 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers.
Really? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll take your word for it on this one, the Root, and I'll just ask, are all of those instances unjustified by measure of the individual school's rules and regulations? Or are you just going to state this statistic and hope that the God of the Gaps theory supports the implicit conclusion that these numbers are a result of racism?
Sometimes students are kicked out of school for basically just being black.
Basically? Well, were they or were they not? When did this happen? Does it happen often? How often? Do I really need to say this? I guess I do. Citation needed.
Like in cases across the country where black girls were suspended for rocking braids or an afro.
Suspended for rocking braids or an afro. Well, I found one story about that. Girls were disallowed from going to prom because of their braids. Now, do you want to know the school's reasoning behind this? Quote, "The specific prohibition of hair extensions, which are expensive and could serve as a differentiating factor between students from dissimilar socioeconomic backgrounds, is consistent with our desire to create an educational environment, one that celebrates all that students have in common and minimizes material differences and distractions." You hear that, the Root? You might say that the school was trying to maintain a safe space of economic justice. How ironic.
So, where do students go after they've been kicked out of school?
Kicked out of school. All of your examples were expelled from school? So, all kids expelled from school are destined to become criminals? Do you have any evidence of that? And of course, all of this is predicated on the assumption that all cases of police involvement or school discipline are unjustified and motivated purely on racism. But, okay, I am ready to be educated. Where do kids inevitably go after they are kicked out of school for reasons that are obviously never their own fault?
Research shows they're 3 times more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system within a year.
What research? Oh, the ACLU's research? Got it.
This is all part of an endless cycle.
Not really. It all comes to a stop when an individual decides to stop committing crimes.
Once kids touch the juvenile justice system, they're 67% more likely to end up in jail again before they're 25.
Right. And again, this is the school's fault. The juvenile possesses no accountability for their own actions throughout this entire cycle. They have no agency of their own. They are inherent victims. Got it.
So, what lessons are schools and police really teaching our kids here?
That actions have consequences?
How can kids excel in school if they're always being kicked out of them?
So the kid who was handcuffed for crying, he's destined for a life of crime. The girls who were restricted from prom for wearing braids, they're bound for prison. And what about the non-black and non-Hispanic students that are handcuffed or expelled? I mean, if this theory is valid, then they should all be in the same percentiles as the black and Hispanic students, shouldn't they? But of course, being kicked out of school is never justified. All such kids are innocent victims all of the time. They're never a danger to other students or represent a disruption to the ability of other students to experience a productive education. And the parents of these kids? Well, they have no role in any of this. It is just the inherent racism of schools dooming these kids to prison. There are no other factors. Well, I guess school kids who get into trouble just shouldn't even try, should they? The route. I mean, based on this information, it's much, much safer to just drop out of school before the schools can condemn them to a life of crime. I mean, everyone's out to get them. Society is just aching for kids to become criminals. Because society, yeah, it really craves more crime. And anything that goes wrong for these kids, it's not their fault. It's not their responsibility. It's the school's fault. Yes, I am sure that that will make for an ironclad defense in front of a jury. As always, thank you for watching.